Okay. Reactions overnight. Thoughts about yesterday's class? No need to lump it. Pardon?
What really stuck with me from the film was that, the ending when there was the monk kind of just walking, and I could almost
The very end,
yeah,
when the monk's walking.
In a very simple, rhythmic walk.
Yes.
You can almost hear him thinking, or they talk about focusing on what you're doing.
Yes.
Being aware.
The buzzword is mindfulness.
Mindfulness, of what you're doing. And so you can almost hear him just saying, step.
And that's what they do.
Feeling the ground.
Yes.
His feet, and turning and step. And just even though he's just doing a very simple walk.
Yes.
It's meaningful.
And it strikes us how simple it is.
Yeah.
And we're going to see when we get to Zen that the insight is that everything is the presence of the infinite. And so that's just a kind of a big picture reflection on what you said about every step, every turn, every moment of awareness. Okay, which we're going to hear an Eastern Orthodox bishop comment in a way on this about what would be a Christian version of Buddhist mindfulness, or a Christian version on understanding the presence of the infinite everywhere, because this Eastern Orthodox bishop says, if we knew the truth of it, every day is Easter. Every second is Easter. And that's what the women and men who are the great mystics, the great visionaries, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuits, who've been running Spring Hill College since 1847, what have you, is an incredible awareness of the presence of the divine. Well, that's what Siddhartha is talking about, an awareness of the presence of the infinite. And he would deal with it impersonally because he's talking about Buddha nature, which is kind of the Buddhist word for Brahman, for level 4. Okay? So the fact that you responded to that at the very end of the film meant that therefore was not just something that was kind of boring and tying up loose ends, but it was really what the whole film had been about. How do you get there? Which is a kind of a grab at, we kind of find ourselves saying, what the hell, Gilmore? You've been teaching this for how many decades? You're still a superficial phony? Wake up! The Buddha is the one who woke up. And notice something that's also very powerful and wonderful about it is so simple.
In order to reach that higher level, you have to just clear your mind.
You just have to let go. Not be so, which of course is Gilmore's problem, because I teach systematic theology and systematic philosophy. And so I'm always being mocked by people for overanalyzing. And I say, well, no, I try not to overanalyze. I try to just let something be and respond emotionally to the moment. Which I was talking, just a little bit with Matt about physical health and this very impressive bottle of water. Actually, did you get a look at the bottle of water that he brought in? He's really banking on a bathroom break before the film. So we were talking about water and the human body and how the human body needs water and how much this is connected with Taoism, because Taoism is all about being in sync with nature, being in sync with the Tao, which interestingly, completely independently of Christianity in the West, interrelated with Buddhism when Buddhism came north into China, which we'll hear about. Okay? Other things that you might want to comment on. I'm going to pick up a little bit of the stuff on Buddhism just to tie off, and also point out that we're doing China today, and they'll only mention Buddhism quickly, but then tomorrow we'll be doing Japan, and Buddhism is a big deal in Japan. So if you happen to have noticed that on handout 10, there are a number of questions that we never answer. I'm going to deal with at least one of them in a few minutes, and then the others will make much better sense when we see Northern Buddhism in Japan. Okay? Anybody want to ask anything else or other comments on what we saw in the video yesterday, or the comments about Buddhism, about suffering and compassion, you know? And if you sort of get it, if you kind of get what Buddhism means by suffering, that it doesn't mean physical pain, I broke my arm or something like that. It means that primal, perhaps richer than cultural anthropology's use of the word primal, is not available for export, but that primal dimension of ourselves of restlessness. Why do we always want more? And can more satisfy us? And of course the point being, no, not if we are level 4 already. And of course the major world's religions generally wouldn't say if we are level 4, they would say since we are level 4, okay? And and therefore I find that that's very rich and supports a lot, okay? Anything else though that you wanted to bring up about the film, about stuff we did on Buddhism, even on Hinduism? Yes, Henry.
It touched on it a little bit, but I thought it was interesting the importance of the religion in school setting, like in education.
Yes.
That's such like a big debate here in America, but like there it's just...
Well, those were religious schools, but the point that's very relevant that you're touching on is that education is a huge deal in Buddhism. In Hinduism, almost like medieval Catholicism, you drink in the religion from stained glass windows, architecture, rituals, and all the rest of that. And Buddhism is kind of austere. It's kind of been like almost like Reformed Protestantism, where you get rid of all this distracting junk, okay, which I don't mean to be disrespectful, obviously, to medieval Catholicism, but that certainly was the Reformed Protestant feeling, okay? So with Buddhism, and notice that for a minute, we have a Noble Eightfold Path, and we have 4 Noble Truths, okay? We also have 4 passing sights. So you get 4 of these, and 3 of those, and 3 baskets of this, and you get all these gimmicks to remember stuff with. So Buddhism is all about healing the experience of suffering, and how do you teach people ultimately to follow the handbook of spiritual direction, as I referred to the Noble Eightfold Path. Yes, certainly. Anything else? So do you want to hear a little something from Miley Cyrus?
Of course.
Okay, and I hope everybody's ready for great depth from Miley Cyrus. But this is very relevant to when I said something about being hung up on levels 1 and 2, and you are level 4, and how levels 1 and 2 just can't satisfy you. Okay? So Gilmore sees this in a periodical, and he says, whoa, we gotta Xerox that and zap everybody with it. Okay. The headline is Miley's Disdain for Greed. She who twerks. Moving right along. Miley Cyrus prefers the simple life, said Alison Glock in Marie Claire. The 22-year-old pop singer and former Disney star has made a fortune in the past decade, but is already bored of the extravagance and excess that comes from being a celebrity. My contractors keep trying to sell me all this shit, says Cyrus, who is building a new home. And I'm like, I'm not going to build an effing house that's got an outdoor shower. I don't need fancy floors my dogs will ruin. Cyrus says she's puzzled by some of our fellow celebrities' seemingly boundless greed. People in this industry think, I just got to keep getting more money. And I'm like, what are you getting more money for? You probably couldn't even spend it all in this lifetime. The materialism becomes a kind of unfulfilling trap, she says. People get more famous so that they can make their brand more famous, so that they can sell more stuff, so that they can make more money. It's a never-ending cycle. Getting more money, having more hits, being the lead in a movie, those things might stimulate you, but they don't make you happy, she says. I've experienced it all already, and I'm telling you firsthand, it doesn't. Isn't that amazing? You know, I mean, it sounds like a pitch for Buddhist or Christian, mindfulness and depth and simplicity. But it certainly is from an unusual source. So I thought that would at least pick up your morning, to hear about that. Okay? Okay. When we did the material on Buddhism, I really do think that if you get it in terms of suffering, what suffering means, that primal discontent, that Ellie Cyrus is talking about. Why do people need more and more? And notice how repetitious it is. It's always trying to be satisfied by that which previously could not satisfy you. Have you all heard that definition? What is the definition of stupidity? Is expecting different results from this.
Insanity?
Yeah, I thought that was
Expecting
famous.
different results.
Excuse me?
That's insanity.
Insanity is expecting different results from the same actions or whatever. Okay? Hello? So suffering, that people try. There's a special on CBS 5:30 News, and a guy let himself be filmed shooting up and finding his next hit and wandering around Boston and having that great flat Boston accent about, I really got to try and find some crack, man, or what have you, okay? And it showed him shooting up. It shows him talking to his brother. It shows him going to rehab. And when he goes to rehab, they ask him, what do you have in your system now? And he says, crack, heroin, OxyContin, and he snorts the OxyContin or some other kind of pill or whatever else. Okay, something else is going to be tonight. Last night ended with a phone call from his brother, and it said something about him being terribly upset. So it may be his brother has finally overdosed. There's some kind of a new additive that you can use with heroin that gives you even more of a power and therefore possibly kills you. Okay? So I was thinking again about having talked with you all yesterday about our society seeking satisfaction, okay, in this relentless pursuit of a repeat of the previous high. And of course it's never, that's what I read that somewhere, that one of these spurs to addiction, okay, is it is never as good as it was the first time. The first time you really got blitzed by this, okay? And my experience with controlled substances, which I don't mind sharing with you, because it's pretty much exclusively in the hospitals. When I have been lying on a table and they put the needle in and they say, start counting, what have you, and the next thing you know, pow, you're gone. And when you're waking up, you're saying, this is so fine. At least that's my experience of it. Although I think I was given something called sodium pentothal, which they use as a truth drug. And apparently, I was your age or a little bit older, and I woke up in this very quiet hospital wing where they were trying to control me, and I was singing country music at the top of my lungs. So the truth was coming out. You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. Anyway, what was that all about? It was about relentless pursuit of satisfaction, okay? Which is obvious in our society. Compassion is a little more subtle, even though we pick up on the emotional meaning of compassion right away. But then that knowledge bit, to know another person. Can you get out of your own agendas? Is this a little scary? I mean, I find it scary in my own life, Can I love people? Can I relate to people? Without bringing so subconsciously all of that psychological freight of possessiveness and wanting something or someone for your own satisfaction, because he or she makes you feel better about yourself or whatever else. But so this was not that. It's not knowledge in the sense that you know things about him or her and that's kind of pulled inside of yourself in some kind of Freudian grasping and possessing, okay? But can we step out of ourselves? So notice that this is all about availability, okay? So it's going to pick up on emptiness and nothingness, okay? If we don't have our own agendas, if we are emptied of our own possessiveness and our own agendas, we have room for other people. We really have room for other people, and other people know that, okay? And my experience, and I may have shared with you, and it'll get relevant today as we talk about Taoism and nature, is working with animals, with nonverbal, dogs, cats, horses especially, but also babies. How do they know that you care for them? And how are there certain kinds of people that are phenomenal animal trainers, because animals just pick up that these human beings know them and care for them. In other words, there's an availability of compassion, okay? So that's compassion of emotion and compassion of knowledge and compassion of existence. That your very existence, and you're mindful, you're attempting to be mindful of that, that your very existence is inclusive. It is infinitely inclusive. So I don't have to go into a logic syllogism. I don't think you guys would probably throw chairs at me if I went into a syllogism. But if you are one with everything, and everything is truly at one, then you are indeed one, not only with level 4 in some internal sense, but you are indeed one with all of reality. Which again is what the great women and men who were the mystics in the religious traditions woke up to. Have this experience that that's what they have. Okay? So that's why I'm saying that question 10 and the essays, if you look up the essays on question 10, on e-companion, on compassion and suffering, I think it'll be a little repetitious. I almost don't think, every so often somebody will say, well, Gilmore, should we download hard copies of those? And my sense is that saddles you with another textbook. Maybe you're grasping, you need to be reassured or something. But if you're in class, you got it. I think in many cases, which is again what I say about coming to class, and I try to really bring this home in the day college students when they are indeed liable to say, Gilmore, I got miles to go before I sleep and promises to keep in my major. So if I'm going to skip anything, I'm going to skip core courses and stuff like that. And since Gilmore, you have so much support material, I'm going to skip this class. Well, okay, people are discerning, making the judgments and prioritizing their obligations. But my sense is if you're here and that dramatic occurrence happens, you get it. Okay? And I see that in essays that people write. Okay? Question 11. Okay? Question 11 is distinguishing between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. Excuse me. This is excuse me, handout 7C. So if you would, 7D, okay? So if you would root around in your notes and get out handout 7D, I'd like to do this reasonably quickly so that we can get some introduction to stuff on Chinese religion. 7D, and this is, I don't mean to insult you, but this is right out of your textbook. I have it Xeroxed so that everybody will have it in class when I'm looking at it, and because it's just handy to have it here. So this is very simplistic and almost insulting to you and to the depth of the material to say, question 11, the answer is the two columns on the top of 7D, left-hand side, which is Xeroxed from page 126 in your text. Okay? So let me speak to that. Well, I'm not going to do the right-hand column until we've seen some Buddhism in Japan. But the left-hand column is what we saw in Sri Lanka. Okay? It's called Theravada, which means the way of the elders. Okay? If you want to jot something down on this page, the Theravada is the way of the elders. Okay? And I'm just going to go down this column. I might contrast it with what's on the right-hand side very quickly, but I just want to use it to summarize and, give us half of this question taken care of. But, so, human beings are emancipated by self-effort. Namely, you reach nirvana by the Noble Eightfold Path without supernatural aid, because there isn't any. There isn't any supernature. There are no supernatural beings. there are these superstitious demons and Dhyana spirits and whatever else that we might have seen in that little bit of primal religion in the video, but there are no angelic beings, there's no personal divine being. So you really, in a very austere way, you're on your own. You take refuge in the brotherhood and sisterhood. Back in Buddha's time, there was a sisterhood as well, okay? The Sangha, S-A-N-G-H-A. Do you remember when they were talking yesterday and Ronald Eyre, the commentator, said if there's an equivalent of the Lord's Prayer in Buddhism, it's this 3 refuges. There you go again, 3 of this, 8 of that, 4 of the other thing. The 3 refuges are, I take refuge in the Buddha, okay, who's now dead and gone, so it's his example that I'm following, because he's not around to help me. He's not in heaven. Okay, I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. They spell it D-A-M-M-A in Pali, P-A-L-I, okay? But we were spelling it D-H-A-R-M-A, the truth that he taught. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha, S-A-N-G-H-A, which is the brotherhood or sisterhood of the people dedicated to being in that religious congregation. Okay? So, to get back to the left-hand column here on handout 7D, human beings are emancipated by self-effort, by living the Noble Eightfold Path without supernatural aid because there isn't any. Okay? The key virtue is wisdom, namely insight into the depths of reality and the depths of oneself. Now, it's a little artificial to distinguish these, the left-hand side with wisdom and say the right-hand side is compassion, because the left-hand side is compassion also. In other words, they would basically be saying it is profoundly compassionate. It's like the Republican concept of compassionate conservatism, that you really do the best for people by not bailing them out, by calling them to assume full responsibility for their lives. Okay? So the third one then, attainment requires constant commitment, and so it's primarily for monks and nuns. So everybody pick up on that? We're all going to have to die and be born one more time at least, and come back as a religious figure who is living that life. Okay? The ideal is an arhat. We saw that at the very end of the film. An arhat is a forest monk. Okay? It's somebody who is living the requirements of the Noble Eightfold Path to the fullest degree. So those guys in the gold robes who were all there for the festival and were praying, and then it said for the monks back to simplicity. Okay, namely back to the forest refuges, which is where they were. Okay. Now the next entry needs a massive response, aggressive response from me. If you would take a pen or something, if I'm trying to barge into your lives a little bit here, and put a big X through the word saint, so you can still see it, but it is X'd out, okay? The Buddha is a supreme teacher and an inspirer, or somebody who's a good example on earth, but saint, for your average Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, Episcopal, and just conversationally in the United States, generally, a saint is a dead person in heaven who's going to help you out, right? So what's Danny Thomas's patron saint, the hospital in Memphis of hopeless cases? St. Jude. Okay, that's St. Jude. If you're a Reformed Protestant, you're almost going to jump on that and say, why do you need St. Jude? You go directly to Jesus. And we're going to see that the Muslims are going to say, why do you need Jesus? Go directly to God. Okay? So a saint is, in the Western mind, belongs over on the right-hand side, because saint means a holy person in heaven who will help you out. And that's what a bodhisattva is on the right-hand side. Houston Smith grew up, his parents were missionaries, Protestant missionaries in China. And he's using the word saint the way John Calvin used saint in Geneva at the birth of Reformed Protestantism. Namely, the saints are the elect. They're living human beings on earth who are living the moral life. Okay? And that's what this word means in the left-hand column. A moral example of the good life that is worthy of your following, okay? But it's so distracting to have the word saint. And I'll do that, you'll see that later on in the course every so often. I'll say, please X that out. Leave it so that you can see it, but X it out because it's so distracting, okay? It minimizes metaphysics because metaphysics is all about what's beyond this life. When you go to heaven, are you still a human being and stuff like that? And that's for them a complete waste of time. The rituals are a complete waste of time because they, in many cases, are about heavenly beings or whatever else, okay? So the practice is centered on meditation, which is mindfulness, wisdom, okay? And all of this is very different in the right-hand column, okay? Very simplistically, I'm not going to spend much time with this, but what is critical in the right-hand column is about halfway down the right-hand column, a bodhisattva. And by the way, you don't need to spell any of these things correctly in any test that we have in here, okay? Any approximation or just describe it, is okay. I don't want you sweating that kind of thing. But bodhisattvas are beings in heaven who will help you out. In many cases, they are like Siddhartha himself, okay, in many of the sects of the right-hand column. Siddhartha is dead and in heaven, and he is a bodhisattva who will help you out. No such thing in the left-hand column, okay? But it's very important in the right-hand column. So we're okay on that? Okay, and that'll be even clearer when we go through the whole question. What I want to do then is recognize that we're putting Buddhism kind of on the side for a moment while we then look at Buddhism going north into China and then into Japan, okay? But we're going to be going into China. And China is a very different experience, okay? Very different experience. The coming pages are 8, 9, 9A, 9B, 9C, 9D, and what have you. I skip Confucianism. If you look at handout 8, just quickly, not necessarily now, you'll find yourself saying, this is sociology. This is political science. This is how a society relates to one another. And okay, I can see if that's about justice and social justice, there's a religious dimension to that. But the gods tend to be kind of earth spirits. We're going to see lots of gods in today's video, okay? And they're all small g gods. They're angelic beings, demonic beings, previously living human beings, earth spirits, all kinds of stuff, okay? But the main divine being is the Tao, okay? And it's pronounced D-O-W, okay? That the Tao is the energy force that pervades the whole universe. So let me make something of a scene about this, okay? Because we're moving from India, and Hinduism and Buddhism, as Buddhism begins in India, even though it's not very much represented in India anymore, but what's the difference, okay? So again, I'm talking about why come to class at the 8-day college, and am I going to do something that you really get, okay, and a major, major distinction, okay? Spirit in India is kind of close to what we mean by spirit in the West. It's not just a life principle, but it's a soul. What do you mean by the soul? If you're a believing Christian, or even if you're not a believing Christian anymore, but that's something you believed in, what is the soul? What is it? Okay? In China, okay, it's not what we would mean by a spiritual soul. In China, stuff is invisible physical force. Okay? Stuff is invisible but physical. Okay? So, everybody, this room, there's nothing between your eyes and my eyes if we happen to look at each other right now. Like there's air. Except we would say, well, the air is what? Nitrogen and oxygen and stuff like that. Okay? There's nothing between our eyes except that. How much electromagnetic energy is between your eyes and my eyes right now? But I'm going to ask you to get out your electronics or a portable radio, which is kind of an artifact, Smithsonian bit now anymore. But Wi-Fi, not only that, but stuff that is cosmic rays and things like that is coming to you. How much is there? But it's all physical, right? Okay. In fact, what is between your eyes and my eyes right now is electromagnetic radiation from these fluorescent light bulbs. Okay? When we look at them, the photons go right to our eyes, but when we look at each other, the photons have hit somebody and are reflected into my eyes. So what kind of a flood of energy is this room filled with? Okay? Everybody notice we're just not talking mindfulness and Buddhism and, Atman and stuff like that. We're talking about something which is physical. The Tao is very probably what George Lucas was using when he talks about the Force in the Star Wars films. Okay? That the Force can be manipulated for evil, and that's what the bad guys do. The Empire. I've only seen 3, 4, and 5, I think. And now there are about 6 episodes out, or 7. Now, I also saw, what's the most recent one that just came out? The Force Awakens or something like that. It just came out. Has any of you seen it? Okay? Because it has some of the old guard in it. It has, Han Solo, who is Harrison Ford, and it has the bright young kid and what have you, and it has Princess Leia and what have you. But they're talking, the Force Awakens. What is the Force? The Force is a physical, available power, okay? And the bad guys can manipulate it and use it to a negative end. Not true of the Holy Spirit, not true of grace, not true of God's life, which is available in baptism and in hearing the Word of God, in Reformed Protestantism, or in sacraments, in Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, and to some extent in Lutheranism and Anglican Episcopal. Okay? The Tao is a force. Okay? It pervades everything. The way electricity does, the way electromagnetic energy, okay? If you're writing right now, if you're using muscle, if your eyes are twitching or anything like that, that's because electromagnetic energy is going from your brain to certain muscles, and that's what's making your body work. So it's physical. 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 Invisible, all pervasive. Now, a big difference is, even though it can be manipulated, like electricity can be manipulated to electrocute somebody in an electric chair, okay? Atomic energy is invisible, but it can be used to do everything that atomic energy is doing in the world today, and it can also be used for bombs and things like that, okay? You need to know that the Tao, for all of its availability to be misdirected, the Tao is basically good. It's referred to as the mother of the universe. It's nurturing. It eventually will restore a balance. So if George Lucas or his successors were to make another film about the Force takes over the universe or something like that, the Force would begin to transform everybody into goodness. So the Tao is profoundly good. So Taoism is extremely optimistic and affirmative and life-affirming. Even though there are demons and diabolical issues and diseases and things that go wrong and what have you, the Chinese take on reality is almost like the beginning of the book of Genesis, that God created everything and saw that it was good. So it's extremely affirmative about relationships with animals. Okay? One of the things, I will go off on a huge tangent right now, but one of the things about being in sync with nature, being in sync with the Tao, that I delight in sharing with rooms full of women especially, and men like yourselves, is to talk about prepared childbirth. Fellow mammals. Am I saying something insulting? Fellow mammals. Veterinarians point out to us that animals, mammals, other apart from humans, do not deliver in pain. Where's all this pain mentality come from? There are very few societies, human societies, where people do not deliver in pain. Okay, they deliver in labor, and veterinarians know that obviously an animal is in labor, but there are indications if the animal is in pain or something pathological is happening. And then in a somewhat gross image, which I've heard from veterinarians, when you're dealing with a horse that is in labor or a cow, the veterinarian has to go in, which means the rubber gloves up to your shoulder practically, and going inside of this cow or mare and straightening out the little one so the little one can come out. Okay, that's when something's pathological. And then, of course, there could be death and injury and whatever. But can you trust nature? The pennant, the signal for the prepared childbirth groups, and very possibly all of you, okay, will know somebody or be yourselves in need of preparation for childbirth, okay? And it's a really good example of being in sync with nature. Nature works. And George Gilmore has been through 2 training sessions and been in the delivery room when 2 of his children were born, and you don't pass out and whatever, it's just so dynamite and so wonderful and whatever else, okay? But the whole understanding is that you can trust nature, and that's essential to Taoism. Well, it's getting up towards 10 of, so I promised that you could get a quick break before we do the film, so let's try to get back pretty quickly. Okay, try to get back in 5 minutes or so. There obviously is a men's and women's bathroom, one each, for one person each, down to my right. And of course there are women's and men's rooms to our left. But can you go hit the John if you want to? I'll stop this and then we'll have the film. Okay? Thanks. Is the present image on video. Is it an example of something that is too mechanical, that is a society that's kind of cut off from its roots. There's a dreadful problem with air pollution in Beijing these days and in China. Notice that these people are in heavy traffic, which is a nice symbol. It's a nice image. Are you in heavy traffic? Do you live in heavy traffic yourself? Are there various things that I gotta stop this if I can?
This video is protected by copyright.
Isn't the overpopulation?
Excuse me, I've still got the video going, and I want to stop it for a second. At any rate, those people are obviously on bicycles and motorbikes and everything else in heavy traffic, which is an interesting metaphor for life. Did you start to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say overpopulation.
Overpopulation is a whole question of balance, again, and also food production in the world. Would we be able to do something? But what was behind the credits was a graphic example of the need for balance, because people were in heavy traffic. They have to keep their balance on bicycles and motorbikes, motorcycles and things like that. They have to follow some kind of traffic way of recognizing other people's rights and who goes first and who does not, and how do you not get killed, okay? So one more example of what was behind the credits, okay? But what we need to do also is go ahead and take a break for 15 minutes, and we'll come back and have a chance to talk about this. Thanks. Okay, the questions from handout 10, questions 17 and 18. 17 is pretty accessible, I think, okay? What do the Chinese mean by religion and by capital G God and small g gods? And I have an ongoing nag that handout 11, whose numbers are in sync with handout 10, is also able to be helpful with various comments on these questions. But question 17, what do the Chinese mean by religion, capital G God, small g gods? There's a lot of material on handout 9A. So if you would get out 9A, let me jot a few things on the board, help you with understanding that, okay, responding to that question. The capital G God is the Tao, and we'll get to that really more specifically when I do question 18. There's material specifically on handout 9. There's also material here on 9A, very much towards the end of the film, as you saw a few minutes ago. But the small g gods, okay? I suggested perhaps that you go through handout 9A and put rectangles, with pen or pencil, anything, red ideally, or green or something, or just a highlighter that would emphasize things. And remember, when the film opened, they met in the office of that particular journal that group puts out. But then we went to the Earth God's shrine, okay? And the Earth God is a nice discussion there that the gods are like human bureaucracies. So you have the Emperor of China, of Imperial China, before the Communist Revolution. The Emperor was the pinnacle, and therefore in the religious frame of reference would be the Jade Emperor. Now the Jade Emperor is an important, invisible, presumably powerful being, but he, or the Empress, she, are invisible, perhaps eternal, but maybe not even eternal, may have come into existence and what have you, but they're physical, okay? They're invisible, but they're physical, and we don't think of them the way we would think of angels, okay, or saints or people in heaven in Christianity, okay? And so the local earth god is like a local cop on the block, okay? Did you notice that he can get fired? In other words, if there's too many problems with livestock or human diseases or whatever, they fire him and hire another one. Yes?
Does the community fire him and then find a new one?
Well, it said somebody, perhaps the mayor or whoever's in charge of the village, and it may be different village by village. Maybe there's a religious figure who does that. And you wonder, well, where do they get the next one? Well, they do advertise in the papers, Earth God needed to show up for interviews. But they undoubtedly have it very structured. Okay, that would be one of the Confucian areas. And just very simply, I want to begin to develop this diagonal here, the balance of the yin and the yang. The yang is Confucius, okay, or Confucianism. Please don't write Confucianism, Confucianism, okay? And his name was Kung Fuzi, K-U-N-G, Kung Fu, and then T-S-E is kind of an honorific. So the founder of Taoism was Lao Tzu, okay, L-A-O-T-S-E. I tried to pronounce this one time in a Chinese restaurant. I can't even tell you this story without swallowing all spit, okay, if that's a little gross of me that you can say such a thing. But I was talking to this woman in a Chinese restaurant, and I said, Confucius, and then I said, Kung Fuzi, and she didn't do anything, and then finally I looked at her, and I said, Kung Fuzi, and she says, Kung Fuzi. And eventually I said it that way. I said, Kung Fuzi, and it's a good accent, for an American to sound that way. But at any rate, his name was Latinized to Confucius. To some extent by Jesuit missionaries. Some of the first people who went to China were Jesuit missionaries who had some astounding successes in Renaissance material, brought clocks and various things about astronomy and what have you. There were just some amazing success stories, and then it was kind of squashed by Rome, which did not was not interested in what were called the Chinese rites, R-I-T-E-S, because it looked pagan and they were worshiping ancestors and what have you. He says, no, they weren't worshiping ancestors. It was like they were patron saints or whatever. Well, at any rate, Confucius is the one for whom Confucianism is named, and then Lao Tzu for whom Taoism is named, okay? And really all of them are dealing with the balance of the Tao. But at any rate, the local earth god was one of them that we saw right away. When they talked about the images in the temple, and they had the gods of, it's put nicely as prosperity, longevity, and posterity. Prosperity meaning you're prosperous, you make enough money, okay? Longevity, you live long, a long life, okay? And posterity, you have children, okay? So those, and notice that they appeared on stage when we saw the play, and the earth gods were escorted under umbrellas to the performances and were shown to their seats. Presumably they were empty chairs there or something like that, okay? And when they talked about the god that watched television, remember he pointed out that the Taiwan Opera, okay, is the building, I presume, is in front of a major temple, so that the theatrical productions are primarily performed for the gods, but then, as they said in the film, human beings can watch too. And presumably the human beings pay the ticket prices and stuff like that. Presumably the gods don't have to pay ticket prices. Or I don't know how they would finesse that. Yes, Ashley?
So, I was really confused about this. They have like one community temple like in each little community, but then within that, they're like you can worship whatever religion.
Chapels, all sorts of chapels.
But the
Okay.
most common like way of life or religion is Taoism.
Well, no, it's also Confucianism, and as he said very early in the film, it's Taoism, Confucianism, and here's the hiccup, Buddhism, and all three at once. So they have all these different gods in these big temples. If you've been to have you been to a really big urban cathedral? Okay, lots of side chapels, side altars, all kinds of stuff. Okay, which is not meant to be disrespectful or irreverent, but that's just part of what their architectural and devotional emphases would be, and that the West somewhat parallels that. Okay. Although these in some ways are different religions, they're not just different saints or divine beings within the religion, okay? So I'm just running through very quickly different gods. But then, how'd you like the seance? I was going to kind of warn you about that one, okay? The seance was when they were in the back room, and again I have to swallow all spit and imitate the guy who was the medium, and he was going, remember? Okay? And then he jumps up in the air, and somebody grabs him, and that's how he disconnects. Okay? When he was going, he was not at home. Okay? And so being a medium means he is a mediator. He's in between. And we're going to see a follow-up to some of this same funeral in the second to last or last film in the whole series. So we'll see it in a week and a half or so, maybe more like 2 weeks. The conclusion of the whole video series, there's another situation where there's a medium who is accessing these other spirits. Did you catch the bit with the chair? They had the chair, they go chicka, 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 chicka with the chair, and then they turned the chair sideways and knocked, scratched on the top of the table, which, possibly I could do this with a chair, and I put it up here, and I put it on the board, and I hit the board, and the chair makes these marks on there, and somebody who understands Chinese might see some kind of a pattern here that looks like a Chinese ideogram, okay, namely a Chinese method, a Chinese bit of communication, okay? But at any rate, notice, and Baudelaire picked up on that when he said some of these gods had once been people, okay? But what happens is somebody dies. At the seance, it said that the father of a family had recently died. that of itself tears a hole in the community. Okay? So then when they talked about the young woman, Matsu, you remember Matsu was a young woman of incredible charismatic gifts, died unmarried, okay, and was just a local divinity, a local celebration, and things spread, and now this happened, of course, before the Communist Revolution in 1948, she's now declared Queen of Heaven. So apropos of Ashley's question about the different shrines and what have you within that temple, Matsu apparently is a really big deal. Okay, and Matsu is talked about on handout 9A right before it changes from item 6 to item 7. Talks about Matsu, okay, and she's a really big deal in there. But apparently there are all kinds of other gods. The god that watched the TV, okay, was kind of a side chapel, if you will. But the father of the family was now, so, you know, everybody begin to notice here that the word God is really distracting. We now see that referring to the beings in Hinduism as 330 million gods is kind of distracting. You could call them gods in a way, but they're just not what we mean by God in the West. And to refer to them as saints, which Ronald Ayer did in that film, helps somewhat. I think and angels is better because the angels pre-exist the earth, and the divine beings in Hinduism pre-exist the creation of the earth, and perhaps survive the destruction of the earth and then the creation of the next cycle of matter. Okay, these gods are what? Earth spirits or whatever else. And I also would like to correct with you that, remember during the funeral there was something about the lords of hell, okay, or the pardon is being sent down to the lords of hell. I think that's very unfortunate. I think they ought to say the lords of the underworld, okay, because hell has a very distinct connotation or denotation for your average Christian. Nobody comes back from hell. Okay, and the hell is presided over by the principal source of evil in the world. That's not what the Chinese mean. Okay, namely, somebody is in the underworld. It's a restless spirit. There's some nice stuff done on that about how you become a god, or how they begin to have well, the English word that's kind of biased also is cult. Okay? In the Catholic Church, the word cult, especially in Latin, is not a negative word. Okay? It means a devotional group of recognitions, prayers, rituals, and things like that for a particular person. Okay? So that's kind of late in arriving. I mean, in your lifetimes, people like John Paul II have been recognized as being in heaven, okay, and therefore recognized as saints, and therefore you can have a high school or a parish name, the parish of St. John Paul II, okay. When I was your age, you know, there was nobody who was a saint that was anybody, somebody might have known. I mean, they were all, you know, centuries past. And I can remember someone I knew well knew about, there's a law firm in Philadelphia, and it's named as Catherine Drexel. And I think Catherine Drexel founded, or her religious order founded, Xavier University in New Orleans, okay, intentionally as a institution of higher learning for African Americans, okay. Well, Catherine Drexel is somebody that everybody knew, okay, and there is now a Drexel law firm in Philadelphia, okay. So, you know, it made saints, you know, really kind of an everyday occurrence to say that you knew somebody, and there might be some elderly people nowadays who knew Catherine Drexel personally, you know. Well, my goodness. I mean, I think I was alive when Catherine Drexel was alive. You know, you might say, oh, don't worry, you're really old. Well, okay. But, you know, it might be surprising that, but now that we have John Paul II and John the 23rd who are recognized as saints. Gilmore, you're off on a tangent, and what's this all about? It's all about the fact that human beings in China become, the only word they have is, in the video, is gods. Okay? So, capital G God is the Tao. And we'll talk about the Tao and what it is. But remember at the very end, they said anything that you can say about the Tao is not the Tao. Okay? The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. Okay? And another line that I find really fun as a teacher, those who know don't speak. Namely the women and men who are the mystics, who have had these sublime visions, they're not running off their mouths. Okay? Those who know don't speak. Those who speak, like teachers, don't know, which shuts me up for a few seconds. And then I go right on talking because I'm not about to be slowed down by that. Okay, but that's part of the book, the Tao Te Ching, and we have it in print on handout 9, and we can look at it in a few minutes. But I want to stay again with question 17, which was that capital G God is the Tao, which I will indeed explain a little bit more fully, but then it's the small g, the gods, and they're all over the place. Okay? The gods on stage salute the gods, and various other comments that are emphasizing the divine. Okay? So we're okay on the first part, or actually on the part of that question that is emphasizing what do the Chinese mean by capital G God and small g gods. What do the Chinese mean by religion? Let me make a huge scene. Huge scene. Huge scene. If you're going to say anything about Chinese religion, it is the most immanent religious experience we're going to see in the whole course. Immanence. The divine is immanent, the Tao. So for starters, really emphasize immanence, that is true of Chinese religion. Now, there's some good stuff in handout 9A, item 4 specifically, okay? And there's also some good stuff in item 6. But item 4 specifically, Ronald Eyre was sitting and chatting with you all in the audience and me about when he said when he's asked about religion in China, he's shown quite ordinary things. Okay, remember? Handling objects. Well, actually, he starts off with a couple of things that are a little distracting because they sound like the Ten Commandments. Honoring your parents, honor the father and mother. Okay. Lighting a joss stick, incense, Joss, but incense stick, that's religion. Well, okay, we can say, yeah, that certainly looks like religion as you would experience it perhaps in your lives already. But then did you catch the other things that are religious actions? Situating a house harmoniously in a hillside, feng shui, okay? The fact that there's a whole integration, which again emphasizes immanence, of religion throughout the whole of life. So let me say something else very simplistic, but that may help you a good deal on this. In China, also, there is no distinction between the secular and the sacred. Everything is permeated with the presence of the Tao. Okay? Nothing is irreligious. Now, of course, they've been affected by secularization from the westernization of those cultures, but that the whole original experience is one of an integration. Now, did you catch another one in there that was part of Chinese religion? Balancing seasoning in food? What? Yeah, Ashley?
You said there was no separation between secular and what?
Sacred. Between the sacred and the secular. Okay? And that this one that I just mentioned would be an example of that. Balancing seasoning in food. Have any of you been to a Chinese buffet or whatever that had Szechuan food, which is fiery hot? Have you had fiery hot Chinese food? Okay, you might, actually you're saying you might not have, but there's plenty, there's some of it around. In fact, it kind of, when I go to Chinese buffets all the time, and nowadays they even warn you. And when you get a menu, okay, I have a menu from a particular restaurant that we order from all the time, and there's like a mini, like hot chili peppers, there's a mini red pepper right next to the items on the menu that says, hey guys, this is fiery. Okay, where I'm going with this though is I don't know about you, I tend to go to Chinese buffets and kind of pig out, okay? But if you are served a Chinese dinner, you're going to have something that's fiery, but right next to it is going to be chopped cucumber, or right next to it is going to be plain white rice. When you were a kid and somebody played a trick on you and gave you a cracker or something with a whole bunch of Tabasco in it, okay? And you had a whole bunch of Tabasco in your mouth, what did you go for? Drink of water, right? Water, and everybody tells you, don't do that, because it just spreads the fire in your mouth. What should you do if somebody pulls a trick on you in the cafeteria here and gives you habanero pepper, okay? Or there's one even worse than habanero now, fiery more, okay? What should you do?
Drink milk.
Pardon?
Drink milk.
Milk, okay, but even better, plain white rice, plain bread, okay? I mean, literally, if somebody gives you something really fiery, what you should do is have plain bread, okay? Because it will break it up and distribute it. And you'll, I don't know whether you chew on it for a while, ideally, and spit it out, or what have you. Or maybe, as Ashley said, after that, you get some milk and rinse that around in the inside of your mouth and have a glass or something, and ew, eats it. But where I'm going with this, and maybe I'm dramatizing it in too vulgar a manner, if you are served a Chinese dinner, there's going to be a balance of fiery stuff with cool stuff on there. So chopped cucumber is going to have that. There's going to possibly be bread. There's certainly going to be white rice. And the rice is not necessarily going to be fried rice with chopped vegetables and things like that. It's maybe absolutely plain white rice. In other words, there's going to be balance. So, George, what were you just talking about? And what is that all about? It's all about food, balancing food, seasoning in food as a dimension of religion. So, let me summarize this. When Ronald Ayer was sitting here, and you've got a certain amount of this on handout 9A, item 4, okay? Perhaps in the West we define religion in a way that makes us incapable of recognizing it in China, okay? Namely, how do we define religion in the West? Transcendence, okay? Ronald Ayer specifically said in the West we have a God, we have rituals. Performing rituals for God is religion, okay? But when I've asked about religion in China, I've been directed to quite ordinary things. And that's when he goes through that list of a number of things, okay, which he mentions in there, okay? Perhaps in the West we define religion as transcendent, as a transcendence experience of contact with a transcendent, personal, supreme God. Okay, and then we look for that in China, and the best we can find is some kind of big deal people in the temples like Matsu. But Matsu obviously does not measure up to the Lord God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in Western Christian experience. Okay, religion for China, religion in China is bound up with respects to an elder, lighting a joss stick, balancing seasoning food, sighting a grave or a house harmoniously, bowing, handling objects, setting off on a journey, okay? So notice how integrated that is with the whole of life, okay? Now, also there's some good stuff in item 6 about religion specifically. There's stuff there about the seance, there's stuff there about throwing the oracle blocks, but there's a nice comment, okay? I'm on handout 9A, the second item or so under item 6, okay? Is oracle blocks, is that just superstitious? Or are you abandoning oneself to dimensions of reality not yet seen? Okay? Acknowledging more than meets the eye and laying yourself open to it. When I was a kid, you were told not to do that because it would make you vulnerable to diabolical possibilities, and you were supposed to stay with strictly credible Christian traditions. And there could be seen to be some real truth to that. But notice that in China, anything that I said about the Tao and that I said about the optimistic, affirmative, profoundly nurturing concept of Chinese religious experience, even though they have diabolical spirits and evil spirits and stuff like that, okay? Next item or so down there, some gods had once been people. there were calamities, there are suicides, and there are disturbances after death. Okay? And Ronald there with a British accent gets it very nicely. It sounds like a horror film. Okay? He says there are disturbances. Disturbances spread. It's a haunting. Haunting, which sounds like, another one of these horror films that's going to be about diabolical possession or whatever else. There's an imbalance, okay? And therefore the whole point of the devotions is to right the balance. The negative can be balanced by the positive forces of piety and worship, okay? So it's a whole way of dealing with a restless spirit. If somebody dies, especially in a suicide, or dies young, or unexpectedly, or tragically, or whatever it might be, it's nature, reality is upset. There's a rending and a tearing in nature. And therefore there are disturbances because there is a restless spirit. So the way of dealing with a restless spirit is to set up a series of devotions for it. Okay? So we're okay on that. Okay. So that captures most of the material that would be relevant to question 17, what do you mean by religion, by capital G God and small g gods, okay? What I need to do then is the next question, which is what are important aspects of Taoism? And that's on handout 9. I think it's important that you find handout 9 and have it right next to you and be able to deal with it, okay? What I want to do is kind of go down the top part, Roman numeral 1. We're obviously not going to do Zen, but I have Zen on this page because Zen develops very specifically out of northern moving Buddhism and Taoism. Okay, so let's start at the top of page 9 and kind of work through it. Okay, what are the origins of Taoism? Lao Tzu is spelled T-Z-U, and Chuang-Tzu, who is one of his disciples, followers, is T-Z-U. You can spell T-S-E or T-Z-U. Okay, you all have grown up with Beijing, right? The capital of China. Okay, have you ever seen a Pekingese dog? Okay, the Pekingese dog is a dog from Peking, P-E-K-I-N-G, which is now Beijing. Okay, but it was also called Peiping, P-E-I-P-I-N-G. It's now been standardized as Beijing, okay? But you can see with Lao Tzu, Chuang-Tzu, and what have you, there are different ways of translating these things. What's underlined there is, it's pronounced the Tao Te Ching, okay? That's the book of Taoist sayings, okay? That's the one that begins. The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao, okay? Which is recognizing that any staggering religious experience is not verbalizable. St. Paul says in one of his letters, and we tend to think he's talking about himself, that he knows someone sometime past who was raised unto the third heaven and saw that which eye hath not seen, nor has ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of humankind. Okay? Namely, it's beyond speaking. And when Thomas Aquinas was dying, supposedly he said that everything he had written was straw, which I've always thought was very disappointing if you're writing a doctoral dissertation on Thomas Aquinas' thought, and Thomas has said it's all straw. Well, what he's saying is it doesn't measure up to the sublime vision of his experience of God, apparently on his deathbed. Okay, so let me continue on page 9, the second line on page 9. The Tao Te Ching, and the T in Tao is pronounced like a D. If there's an apostrophe, it's pronounced like a T. The Jing, if there's an apostrophe after the CH, then it's pronounced Ching. And we'll see that, I saw it briefly in the film when they talked about Tai Chi, okay, the Chinese martial art. But at any rate, it's a nature mysticism. It's all kind of an immanence. It's about the natural goodness of things, as opposed to Confucianism, which is more about law and order, structure. We'll look at a handout tomorrow morning as a summary of this that will also, by the way, set us up for the Japanese religion and Zen. But anyway, some things that are emphasizing the natural goodness of Taoism as opposed to Confucius's worry about evil. Okay? Namely, when you're dealing with nature, apparently there's an enormous amount that you can trust. and I've really picked up on that in working with animals, horses and stuff like that. I don't trust black widow spiders. Okay, I keep my distance, or I kill them if they're going to be around my kids. Have you all heard of a brown recluse spider? Okay, I am super careful about them because they're around lots of places where I would be exposed to them. But this is a little bit of Taoist practical reality. Here in the Southeast, have you ever gone into a house or moved into a house and they're little teeny flesh-colored lizards that you kind of run around? Did anybody know what those are? Okay, this is worth a minute. We start doing stuff with Taoism and you say, Gilmore, this is a theology class. Why are we doing zoology and prepared childbirth and all kinds of physical stuff? Because it's relevant. Okay, those little guys, and I'm probably going to forget how to spell, I think Mediterranean is 2 R's in the middle. It's a Mediterranean gecko, and they are invasive exotics that were brought here in ships or whatever else. They are my buddies. Okay, they're nocturnal. If you have the little ones and you have a front porch or something like that, at night, if you have the lights on and you go out with a flashlight, you might see the adults. The little ones that you see are kind of flesh-colored, and the adults at night are flesh-colored also. During the day, they're black or brown, and they're always in hiding. Okay? Somebody once commented to me about geckos, that geckos are, and this is what the guy said to me, they are voracious insectivores. It was all I could do to control myself and not say, not only that, but they eat a lot of bugs. Okay? Geckos are, if I catch them, I turn them loose in my house. Okay? Little ones. Okay? Because the house, it's an old house, it's a 100-year-old house, so there are geckos in there anyway. But I want them to get the brown recluse spiders. And if a brown recluse spider bites you, the venom stays localized and it does not become neutral, okay? And it causes an unhealed wound that eventually has to be cut out, okay? So what are we talking about, Gilmore? We're talking about elements of nature that are dangerous. I'm very careful around, I try to get nowhere near a cottonmouth moccasin snake. You guys know what cottonmouth moccasins are? Okay? They don't back off. Okay? And they can get about this big. The biggest one I think I've ever seen was in the zoo. Okay? And they're about as thick as a muscular person's biceps or as your thigh. Okay?
Don't they kill you?
Pardon?
Don't they kill you?
Oh yeah, they'll kill you right away. Okay? Namely, they're probably, along with really big rattlesnakes, the most venomous. Well, the most venomous snake around here, which is extremely rare and pretty well exterminated, are coral snakes. And coral snakes have the same kind of venom as cobras, okay, which is a neurotoxin, so it affects your nervous system. So it can cause you, arrested breathing or heart attacks or whatever. Whereas pit vipers, which is cottonmouth moccasins, rattlesnakes, and copperheads, okay, what they inject into you begins to digest your musculature, okay, and is incredibly painful and of course attacks your whole system anyway. But cottonmouth moccasins are extremely dangerous because they don't have a warning like a rattlesnake, okay. Gilmore, here we go again. You know, what is this supposed to be an example of? It's an example of the fact that nature is incredibly trustworthy and nurturing, but nature is also extremely dangerous, okay? Lao Tzu and Confucius supposedly existed at a time in Chinese history of tremendous political uproar of various ways. And Lao Tzu said you have got to trust people and trust people's better instincts, and that will build a better society, okay? Confucius said you've got to have law and order. You've got to have structure. Okay, the handout that I'll be referring to tomorrow morning refers to the noble savage, which was a theory by a French political scientist named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it was about the Native American Indians being absolutely uncorrupted by European culture. Okay, have you seen a movie called Dances with Wolves? Anybody seen that? See it sometime when you get a chance. It's Kevin Costner. He's been incredibly brutalized by the Civil War. He's because he's done something very heroic, the Army will send him anywhere he wants, and so he asks to go absolutely out to the far west. And he ends up in the Dakotas, and he ends up in a relationship with the Sioux, okay, the Dakota tribes. And they are incredibly peaceful, good people in union with nature. Okay? Although I always heard that the Sioux were really frightful opponents, and that they're opponents because we've attacked them and taken their land away from them. But apparently Sioux, S-I-O-U-X, means snake in their language, so they'd rather be called the Dakotas. But do we trust people or do we control people? Okay? Back to a fun conversation. Instead of talking about you and prepared childbirth, how are you guys going to get along? I love saying this to people your ages. You all think you're young. And I say, you're a fifth of a century old. You think you're a fifth of a century? By the time you are double your age now, are you going to have children? Are you going to have teenagers? Teenagers! Are you going to trust them or are you going to control them? And how are you going to balance it? I had the most wonderful life experiences with that because I was a single parent for a while and my house was infested. You have to think roaches. My house was infested with teenagers. And I loved them. They loved me. I trusted them. They are, for the most part now, married. They have children. They've made great successes out of their lives. But I would go to a graduate class in Birmingham, okay, and phone home just to see what was happening, and these people would be loose in my house. One time, somebody answered the phone, and this guy was probably the closest to a pathological criminal than anybody I ever knew well personally. But he was trusted and loved, and the next thing I knew, he was in the Special Forces. He got a degree in criminology at South Alabama and was working with young people at risk. When I knew him, he got so furious because people were tearing up his house that he took a steak knife and plunged it into his abdomen. When I called from Birmingham, he answered the phone. What do you do? Okay? When I was working with the youth group at St. Lawrence Parish, okay, we had discussions. We had one discussion with parents, and one of the people, one of the teenagers in my group, her father was the regional director of the FBI, so they were present at this thing. We had a get together and we faced that question that I just brought up. Do you trust your teenagers or do you control them? And how do you decide and when? And part of my insight as a parent was you have to trust teenagers because you don't have a choice. Can you get pregnant at 1 o'clock in the afternoon just as fast as you can at 1 o'clock at night? Yes. Okay? So my sense of working with teenagers was you got the 10 Commandments, but you've also got thou shalt not kill thy friends in a car accident, thou shalt not brutalize it, thou shalt not get yourself pregnant or somebody else pregnant, thou shalt not be drug dependent, alcohol dependent, all kinds of things, which if trusted and not confrontational, they don't have to be confrontational in reaction. So we had this get together at St. Lawrence Church with parents and teenagers, and we sat around and talked about discipline and teenagers. Would you like to have sat in on that one? Okay? There was somebody who said, as long as your feet are under my table, you'll do what I say. Is this a pretty persuasive argument for that teenager to no longer have his feet underneath that table? So they ended up at the Wussy Gilmore's house, okay? Because they ran away from home. Or they ran away from home and they weren't in our house and we tracked them down, got them there and helped with reconciling all the rest of that, okay? The wife of the regional director of the FBI was this very nice woman. Her daughter was in my class. Remember everybody's name. I remember on the tips of my tongue right now. At any rate, she was kind of in a nice motherly suit, gray suit, Sunday in between masses or something like that. Okay. She said she had a son whom she put on restriction. Do you guys know that expression? What's it mean to be put on restriction?
Like grounded kind of.
Grounded. And what does that mean?
Like you don't have as much
You
freedom.
don't have as much freedom. You can't drive the family car. You might be very limited in terms of electronics that you can use and stuff like that. Okay? She stood up in front of us and she said, one of my sons was so uncontrollable that I had him on restriction for a year. And then she had the spine and the integrity to say, it didn't work. Yay, let's hear it for honesty. Both of her sons are now attorneys in Baldwin County. And one has been a district attorney, or one of them is now a municipal judge or something like that. I mean, yes, great kids, whatever. But it's a challenge, okay? What are you going to do with your teenagers, okay? To what extent can you control them? To what extent do you trust them? Okay, everybody, I'm going to say something that you're going to say, Gilmore, you set this up, you phony baloney, okay? You guys, dealing with your teenagers, is this going to be a question of balance? Ah, gotcha. That's what the whole class today of China has been all about. And that's what Confucius and Lao Tzu were dealing with. What do you do? What should the United States of America do with its prison population? Okay? Typically, there's a very liberal, left-wing approach either in Germany or in the Scandinavian countries where they treat the prisoners like people in rehabilitation hospitals. Okay? They are controlled in terms of the fact that they can't leave. But they have TV, they have nice meals, they are rehabilitated. Okay? Whereas one of the great problems in the United States of America is when people go into our prisons, they come out worse. Literally. Very probably literally worse in all sorts of ways. So, should we be Confucian or should we be Taoist? The approach to prepared childbirth nowadays among lots of OBGYNs, obstetrician gynecologists, okay, is profoundly Taoist. I have a video that I used to show that was made in the 60s, 70s, which is when my kids were born, and they refer to childbirth almost as Confucians because what you do with a woman is, quote, knock them out, drag them out. Knock a woman out with a general anesthesia, lay her flat on the back, which is not going to help gravity, okay? There are positively childbearing chairs which are open in the bottom where gravity helps the baby come out, okay? And I have somebody who comes when I teach the sex and marriage course. I have a woman come who's a doula, D-O-U-L-A. She's an RN and fully experienced registered nurse, okay? But she's also a specialist in obstetrics, okay? And and as a doula, she's not really a midwife, but she's somebody who facilitates births. It's like one of these people that I told you who's a wizard with animals, who just knows what to do and stuff like that. She has these incredible stories of people who are incredibly uptight and they cannot. I worked through very physical stuff in that class talking about childbirth, you know. The baby cannot come out if the cervix is tight. The cervix has got to be 10 centimeters for the baby to get through, okay? Okay? Cervix is what connects the vagina to the uterus, okay? It's right, it's a kind of a circular muscle in there, sphincter, okay, that has to expand, okay? So don't push. The whole idea is don't push, okay? Because, we're talking about Taoism, okay? The system works, okay? The uterine muscles that cause contractions are not controlled. They're controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which is what controls your breathing and controls what makes the food go down, peristalsis, what makes the food go down, what makes your heart beat, okay? That's the autonomic nervous and muscular system. That's what runs the contractions. So let the contractions work. So there's marvelous stuff. There's a book about China, appropriately, called The Good Earth, where a woman is working in a rice paddy. She's pregnant, 9 months. Her time comes. She goes to the side of the rice paddy, delivers the child, cleans up the child so the child's breathing is clear, okay, cuts the cord, ties off the cord, puts the baby, and walks back into the into the rice paddy, okay? My older son was born in the only hospital that then allowed the father to be present in the delivery room. When you have that, they allow the father to be in a private room with the mother and the baby. There were no private rooms. My mother-in-law was an MD, so they let the baby and the mother come home the same day the baby was born. So we drove into the driveway, and my wife got out of the car, and she moved very gently. She was not working out on a trampoline that day. Sarcastic, cynical, disgusting remark. Okay? She had delivered the baby 4 hours earlier, and she walked in the house dressed as you and I are dressed and went somewhere and lay down and whatever. It really helped that her mother, who was at the house at the time, was an MD and a diagnostic specialist, and that's why they allowed the baby to come home. But contemporary American medicine, and this is the last thing I should say, contemporary American medicine is getting more and more in tune with the fact that if you just let it, the body will heal itself, which is profoundly Taoist. Sometimes you have to go in. If somebody has appendicitis, you have to be a Confucian. Okay? I think you got it, and we'll pick up on this a bit more, and I'll work through the material, the specific material for question 18 tomorrow morning. Okay? And tomorrow morning, just real quick, tomorrow morning we'll be at least setting up for a test on Thursday. Okay? So don't be paranoid. The questions are all on handout 10. We'll have time tomorrow for a review, and you guys will be fine. All right? Thanks. Let me let you go.